All right. Hello, everyone, and thanks for listening to the Quality Hub, chatting with ISO experts. I'm your host, Xavier Francis, and I'm here today with Scott Dawson, President of Core Business Solutions. Glad you could join us.
Thanks, X. Glad to be here.
It's fun having you here. It really is. And I really do appreciate you taking the time for this. So the next 2 weeks, we're going to take a little turn from ISO standards, and we're going to talk about CMMC, which stands for Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. And if you work at all with the DoD, you should be aware of this and how it will affect you. But before we begin, let's talk to Scott and hear a few words about his journey into CMMC.
Yeah, it's been a journey.
It has.
About 4.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we had been working with information security and cybersecurity prior to that with ISO 27001.
Mm-hmm.
So we were familiar
Mm-hmm.
with security controls and that type of thing. But we started to have some of our customers ask, can we help with NIST compliance, DFARS compliance, CMMC? All of those are kind of the same thing to some degree. And so started to explore and learn and found that it's a big challenge for small businesses.
It is.
It's full of a lot of technical gobbledygook. I don't know
Way
if
to
that's
put it.
I don't know if that's a
That's the
technical
technical
word.
term. That's the technical term.
It's in the fine print of the
Yes.
standard. Yeah. But I really felt like we could add a lot of value by simplifying this and just finding a straightforward path to compliance for our customers. So it's been interesting.
Yeah.
Quite
And then
interesting.
CMMC's been bumped and changed and moved and kicked down the road. But we're pretty sure we're going to be having something by next year. So that's why we wanted to be here talking with everybody. Well, let's dive in. Let me start with the first question. Now, this is going to be basic. So this episode, we're going to talk mainly about what it is, how we deal with things, what you need to know, some definitions, things like that. And then next week, we're going to talk a bit more about the detail that might actually affect specific people, specific businesses. So what is CMMC?
Yeah, as you said, it's an acronym that has another acronym.
The government and acronyms.
Exactly. That stands for the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification.
Okay.
So pulling that apart, it is a formal certification of a company's cybersecurity maturity
Mm-hmm.
that indicates that your company is trusted with government information.
Okay.
So the government has been aware for years that when they purchase products, materials, and parts for the Defense Department,
Mm-hmm.
there are a lot of secrets about what kind of equipment, what kind of systems are being utilized on the battlefield.
Mm-hmm.
If our adversaries can get their hands on the drawings of this equipment and these systems, then they could reverse engineer not only to know what we're using
Mm-hmm.
in terms of defenses or weaponry or whatever the case may be, but then how they might be able to defeat those particular defenses in use in a potential warfare situation.
Right.
And there have been many times where we've seen advanced systems that we put out as a new upgrade to our defenses. And soon afterward, one of our adversaries puts out an identical piece of equipment
Mm-hmm.
without having done their own research and development, stealing our intellectual property as a country, and really endangering our nation and its security because we're not, maintaining this competitive advantage on the battlefield. So CMMC was originally conceived as a way to protect this information that gets distributed
Mm-hmm.
to suppliers and sub-suppliers and subcontractors. But as this information gets distributed into the private sector, we need to reduce the likelihood that information can be easily stolen through a hack or whatever it might be. So they began releasing regulations in their contracts under the DFARS clauses, and NIST published a set of controls that itemize the protections needed on a particular network. And there was a self-reporting process for a number of years. And now they're upgrading it to a formal certification.
Or you're going to be audited for it. And we're not talking about top secret stuff here. We're talking about things that aren't necessarily classified.
Yeah.
But it still details like you might only have the drawing for a ball bearing or a set of bearings or something like that that'll go on a piece of equipment. But if they can find all those little pieces
Yeah.
and put them back together,
They can learn a lot
Yeah, they
about
can learn
what
a
we're
lot.
doing.
So-
So yeah, you're right. These are not top secret systems. They're the documentation, different types of documentation, but one of those is called Controlled Unclassified Information, CUI,
another acronym.
another acronym. And CUI is things like drawings and technical specifications and things like that for unclassified programs
Mhm.
that need special protection. And particularly manufacturers will find themselves utilizing technical drawings and other types
Right.
of things from their customers. And that information needs to be protected, to a degree. And then on a broader scale, there's another type of information called federal contracting information, FCI,
Okay.
which is, I guess, even less sensitive, but it's important to keep it protected. Those would be things like your contract with the government, schedules of when you're going to ship, purchasing information,
Mhm.
quotations, that really anyone doing work anywhere in the defense industry, any kind of documentation related to those contracts is federal contract information, FCI. So there are different levels of protection, different levels of certification
Mhm.
that apply to these different types of documents, which we'll talk more about.
I'm sure with FCI, it's also something where if you can look at someone's contract, you might know who that's connected with.
Yes.
So you can find your next person.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to go get them next.
Yep.
This person might not have something, but they work with this person.
Yeah.
that does, so.
Anyone with
all those threads.
That's right.
Yep.
Anyone with an intention to harm will read this documentation with a jaundiced eye,
Mm-hmm.
and piece things together, as you said, for their advantage. And so, FCI and CUI are really the classes of documentation information that the DoD is trying to protect.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, you gave us a little bit already. Can you give us a little bit of background on CMMC? You already talked about it with how it kind of grew out of DFARS and NIST, but are there any other important background details about
Yeah.
it?
We
Mhm.
first started to see these requirements in January of 2020.
Okay.
They were revised in 2021. These requirements are found in different places.
Okay.
One is in the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulations Supplement,
DFARS.
DFARS,
Mm-hmm.
252.204-7012, and others,
Mm-hmm.
which are the federal contracting regulations. If you're going to get any contract with the government, you're going to be regulated by what are called FAR clauses. If you're going to get a contract with the Defense Department, you're going to get the Defense Department's additional requirements, supplemental requirements,
Gotcha.
which is DFARS. And in those numerous regulations, there are a few specified for protection of FCI and CUI.
Okay.
When we in the cybersecurity world are talking about DFARS, we're not talking about all of DFARS. We're talking about specific regulations, this 7012, 7019, 7020, 7021. Those are what companies are obligated to meet. Those regulations are what companies are obligated to meet if they accept a government contract
Okay.
or a subcontract to a defense contractor anywhere in the chain of the tiers of suppliers within the defense industrial base. Sometimes there's 7 or 8 tiers deep.
Wow.
From, say, a prime contractor.
Right.
So DFARS are regulations. Then there's a document called NIST SP-800-171,
Right.
which NIST, National Institutes of Standards and Technology, publishes hundreds and hundreds of documents, kind of like ISO
Mm-hmm.
on the international scale. NIST is the U.S. government's version of standards publications.
Right.
And one of those standards is for the protection of CUI. The government has seen this issue of controlled unclassified information, not only in the defense industry, but throughout the government. There's all kinds of information that gets shared with the private sector that needs to be protected. So there's a list of requirements, 110 requirements in the NIST standard that specify the protections that a company needs to put in place, from technology to training to facilities security
Yep.
and other aspects that companies would need to, comply with.
Well, and
So
communication of that stuff as well.
exactly
Mhm.
right. So DFARS says, among other things, as accepting this contract means you accept responsibility to implement the controls that are in the NIST standard.
Right.
So they kind of fit
Those
hand in
110,
glove.
which are actually broader than 110.
Yeah, exactly right. Yep. So now CMMC takes it a step further, and it is going to be this third-party certification, kind of like ISO
Mhm.
certification or AS certification.
right.
If listeners are familiar with those, this will be another third-party audit or assessment. They're referring to them as assessments that will ensure that a company is indeed following the 110 requirements in NIST. And it's not just an honor system. Up to this point, it's been you're on your honor
Mhm.
to implement these things, and you're on your honor to self-assess and report your level of protection.
And you're on your honor if there was a breach.
Exactly
report
right.
it.
So the honor system has been questionably reliable, shall we
Mhm.
say. Okay. So the government is saying we're going to step this up and we're going to require a formal third-party certification.
Okay.
And that's what's coming. You referred earlier to,
Right.
hey, we think something's going to be coming.
Yeah.
It's the formal release of the CMMC regulations. Now, all that to say, there are different levels of certification. So this harks back to the maturity component
Mhm.
in the CMMC label. There's 3 different levels of certification that a company can pursue. Level 1 is called foundational.
Okay.
If you only handle FCI, meaning you have any government defense related contract, by definition, you have federal contract information related to that contract, you'll need to be at least level 1 certified.
Okay.
Okay. Then there's a level 2 that if you handle FCI and CUI, and that is a subset of the broader list,
Mhm.
that's advanced controls, and you have to comply with NIST in its
Okay.
entirety. And then there is also a level 3, which is NIST Plus.
NIST Plus.
NIST Plus.
Mm.
And that's the expert level, which is a very small list of companies that isn't quite classified programs,
Mhm.
but very close.
Okay.
And they borrow some of the additional security protections from the classified program and add those to the 110 requirements of NIST, and that's level 3.
Okay. So 3 levels in CMMC.
Yeah.
With these, again, we're talking about if you have federal contract information, controlled unclassified information, and above.
Yep.
Who is that going to affect? Who is the CMMC now going to affect?
Well, as we said, any company anywhere in the defense industrial base at any tier will need to be level 1, level 2, or level 3 certified.
So there's no way of getting out.
No way of getting out if you're going to do work related to defense.
Okay.
That affects at least 300,000 companies
Wow.
that make up the defense industrial base.
Wow.
That is an estimate because there's no log of all of these companies. Because if you're at tier 7 or tier 8, you're not on some register somewhere
Right.
saying that you accepted a contract to
Right.
build the ball bearings or whatever the
Right.
case may be, or paint the parts,
Right.
or whatever you're going to do.
Or mow the lawn.
Or mow the lawn.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. But the estimates are 300,000 companies at least.
So 1/3 of a million companies.
1/3 of a million companies, which is in the United States, it's 7 times more certifications than all of ISO 9001 in the United States.
Wow.
7 times more companies.
Wow.
Okay.
That's a lot. So it's going to affect a lot of
A
people.
lot of companies.
Mhm.
And so it's very important that everyone's, listens carefully, understands what's coming, and first of all, determining, does this apply to me?
Right. So what kind of businesses are you likely to find in that? I mean, obviously, if you manufacture parts for the government, duh.
Yeah.
But what about other businesses?
It could be service companies. It could be
Okay.
manufacturers. It could be distributors. Any company that has a defense-related contract, this will affect.
Okay.
And what will happen is these certification requirements will be added to your contract.
Okay.
As soon as the CMMC rule finally publishes and the regulation finally publishes, which we expect to happen maybe by the end of this year or first quarter in 2025, if you want to be eligible,
Mhm.
once this is released for a federal contract with the Defense Department, you'll have to have a CMMC
Now,
certification.
will current contracts be modified for that as well? Let's say you're in the middle of a contract, CMMC hits, are you going to have to be compliant?
What they're saying is it will likely be implemented upon renewal or
Okay.
extension.
Okay,
So they can't certify 300,000 companies all at once.
correct.
There's no way.
No.
So they're going to have to phase this in. And one of the ways they're going to phase it in is to implement as contracts come for renewal or extension.
Okay.
And then, of course, new contracts, you'd expect
we'll
those
have
to
yes.
be added in
Yep.
there as well.
Okay. So how can you know if you're affected?
Well, read your contract.
Read that contract.
Read the contract. So if
but if you have a contract, then likely you are going to need to at least be level 1.
Yeah. So you really do need to read your contract,
Mhm.
read to see if the NIST or the DFARS 252, 204, 7012 clause is in your contract. So you just read down through. They're all numbered, and go down numerically till you get to that section. And if it's in your contract, it applies.
Now, what if you're a small company? Let's go with the ball bearing thing.
Yeah.
And you're making this for another company that uses it in a company that they service.
Yeah.
Would that still be in your
Yes.
contract? Okay.
Yeah, because it is, as long as it's related to the manufacture of defense related products.
So in theory, you should know, but if you're a small company, you just know that I'm making this for X company, and you know some of the business concepts of it, how much it's going to be, how much money is, stuff like that. If you haven't read your contract thoroughly, you may not know.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
I'm going to say this probably fits into the fine print
Yeah.
section of these contracts are complicated.
Yes, exactly.
There's, sometimes dozens or hundreds of pages. And when you're trying to land a deal and you have this contract, do we all study in detail every line of these contracts?
No,
and all
you
the
want
fine print?
you want to get it signed so you know you have business
You
coming
want to
in.
get it signed because you have to make a shipment next week.
Exactly.
So it's time to go back and read these regulations and start to understand that this is going to be a go, no go situation.
Yeah.
You're going to be qualified or you're not qualified
Yep.
based on your certification status.
Okay. So you talked about it a little bit already, that there's 3 levels to CMMC. Can you get a little deeper into some of the parts that are involved with each level?
Yeah. So level 1, the foundational level, applies to all defense contractors.
Okay.
It's fairly straightforward. There's 17 requirements
All right.
as opposed to 110 I mentioned earlier.
Right.
There's a subset of those, 17 of those, that I think we'd all refer to those as very basic cybersecurity protection.
Okay.
Things like having multi-factor authentication. We're all kind of used to having to put the code in on our phone
Right.
or whatever the case may be. And a few other kind of basic cyber practices needed. They call it fundamental cyber hygiene,
Okay.
having strong passwords, physically protecting your servers, lock the door if it's in a closet somewhere.
Yep.
It's not a big, heavy lift to implement these requirements. And the certification is a self-certification. It's still an honor system approach.
So level 1's still an honor system.
Yeah, if you're at level 1, you're going to be able to self-certify. You have to sign a document that says that you're meeting these requirements, but you don't need the third-party auditor to come in.
Right.
Okay.
But you still, upon assigning that, it's a little bit more serious than it used to be, where now there's repercussions if they find out
legal
you're wrong.
repercussions
Yeah.
that could come about. And
Not just you lose a contract, it could be jail time, fines, things like that.
Yeah, exactly right. Yep.
So it's a little more than just,
you're falsifying information if you're signing something that's not true.
Yeah,
basically,
exactly.
right? Now, level 2, which will apply to manufacturers,
Mhm.
okay? They estimate around 80,000 of the 300,000 would need a level 2.
Oh, well, that's still quite a bit.
Still quite a bit. That's double the number of U.S. ISO certifications.
Right.
So we're still talking about tens of thousands of companies.
Right.
Okay. That is where NIST 800-171 in its entirety comes into place.
Okay.
It's protection of the CUI, all the technical documentation and other documentation. It has 110 different requirements. It covers things like access control and incident response and system integrity. And this is where the mumbo jumbo gobbledygook comes into play, especially if you're not technical yourself. If you're not an IT, professional yourself, I'm not. And I've had to study and ask questions and ask another question, have somebody else explain it to me in simple language.
Yep.
And it's a challenge to just understand what's being required.
Well, I know we did training on NIST specifically
Yeah.
several years ago.
Right.
I think we had about 18 hours of training,
Yeah.
if I remember correctly, plus. And I remember editing some of the video on that, and it was just like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
What are they saying?
Yeah.
It's written in legalese, if you will, where you're like, what are they? If you don't know what they're talking about.
Well, the other challenge with those requirements is that they're non-specific.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't say how to do any of it. Doesn't say how to apply it to your particular situation.
Right.
It's a list of 110 requirements with no explanation. So you
Right.
have to go to other places
Yep.
to get explanation to really understand what it means and what the assessor would look for
Right.
when you go through a certification.
So having
as
an
well.
expert on your side really makes a
Yeah.
difference there.
So that's where the third-party certifications come into play as level 2. Level 3 ups the ante even more. So now you're talking about 110 plus, I'm not sure I know exactly the number, but it's another 19 or 20 requirements on top of that.
And I'm sure they're not getting easier.
These are much more advanced
Exactly.
security protections. And the other thing to recognize is that level 3 certifications are not going to be done by a third-party auditor. It's going to be done by the government. So it's a government assessor that's going to certify.
Not someone who's been trained by the government. This is actually
and they
somebody
think
from the
maybe 1,000 or 2,000 companies at most, still a lot of companies,
Yeah.
would need a level 3. Those companies are generally much more sophisticated, usually mid-sized companies, larger companies, or those involved in very secure defense programs.
So probably names we would know.
Or not
common.
know.
Or not know. Yeah.
Or not know.
Yes. Yes.
Exactly right.
I know. I used to live in Northern Virginia, and I would be like, hey, what do you do? I do this. Well, what company do you work for? I can't tell you.
I can't tell you. It's one of those guys.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's one of those guys. But
Yep.
again, in your contract, it will specify, as soon as they start rolling this out, does this contract require level 1?
Mhm.
And then a different contract might require level 2, and yet another contract might require level 3. Depending on the mix of contracts you have, you could find yourself needing to be certified in 2 or 3 different
Yeah.
certification levels. What do you do in that case? Get certified to the highest number.
Right. Right. So look at your contracts and figure out what you need.
That's right.
Please tune in next week for part 2 of CMMC Basics with Scott Dawson. I really want to thank you for being here today.
Yeah, you're welcome, X. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. And we want to thank everyone who's listened to our podcast today. We hope it's been informative for you. Now, if you're looking for more information about Core Business Solutions and how we can help you with ISO certification, cybersecurity, customized training, or CMMC, please email us at info@thecoresolution.com. You can also visit our website at www.thecoresolution.com. And if you haven't already followed us on your favorite podcast platform or on YouTube, which is also where you can find our CyberHub podcast, which talks about CMMC, be sure to do so, and that way you won't miss the next Quality Hub podcast when it's released next week. Have a great day.